Okay, good morning. We are doing today Lamed Ches and Beis. We are starting out at the two dots. Katani, right? But Ali Irakis, the Mishnah had told us back on Lamed Vav. Mishnah told us case of Vorchan al Paris. You make a height. Then the Mishnah told us about a gefen. You make a gefen on Yayin. Then the Mishnah told us that on Paris Haaretz you make a bar Bradama. Except for past. On past you make a Hamaiti. And then the last points in the Mishnah was about Yerakis. The Mishnah is also machlekes. One man number says Yerakis make a Hadama, and the other man number Buddha said you make a Bar B'nei Deshayim. So we're working now on the Gemara where the Mishnah had told us about the Yerakis, that on Yerakis you make a Hadama. Val ha Yerakis Emer Bar Hadama. It says the Gemara Katani Yerakis Dumya Depas. We learn out that these vegetables are like bread. Ma pas. Just like bread, which changes as a result of fire, and nevertheless you still make a hamaitzi, so to Yerakis, which change as a result of fire, and you still make a hadama. Now, I ask you, does that statement on its own make any sense? No, not really, right? You make a hadama on vegetables before the fire, and then after you cook them, you make a hadama? What's that have to do with pas? Pas before you would make a pas, and you would have just the wheat. You would make adama. After you made the fire and you bake the bread, then you make hamaitzi. They're not the same. So in order to understand this, we have to first go to Rashi Tesis. So what does Rashi tell us? Even after they get baked, even after they get cooked, nevertheless they're still considered they're still considered as though they were in their original state. And we still make a hadama on them, says Taisus. Vegetables are not the same as bread, obviously. What do we mean? When you take the wheat and you're making it into bread, you're making something better. When you take the vegetables, there are vegetables that when you cook them, you're not making it better. Notice that's a very cute language of Taisus. There are the vegetables that when you cook them, you're not making them better. There are vegetables, meaning that what? Not all vegetables, as we will see in the next Taisus. This depends on the kind of vegetable that we're talking about. So what then is the Gemara trying to say? What is this comparison? Like, why are you saying anything comparable to bread? What do they have to do with each other? What we want to try to explain is like this. Mahapas ein bishul megareas habraka, just like by bread. The bishul of the wheat, right? The cooking, the baking of the wheat is not going to ruin the bracha. In fact, you make a better bracha. You don't simply make a adam anymore. Now you make a hamaitzi. So too by vegetables, they're considered to be in their original state even after cooking. And the bishul doesn't ruin it in the sense that it loses its bracha, it still gets the ability to make a hadama. So again, what is the point of the Gemara comparing vegetables to bread? Not in the sense that they're similar. They have one sense that they are connected, and that is that by bread, just because you bake it, you don't see that it gets a lesser bracha. In fact, it gets a better bracha. So too by vegetables, even if you cook them, doesn't get a worse bracha. We still consider Messiah Kaima, we still consider it to be the original state, and it gets the same bracha. So again, Mali Ragas Makatani, Ragas to be the past, not Pashan or after Ragas Namshin or nevertheless, they still get the bracha of Hadama. Omarav Noy Mishmei Dabaya. They say Meresh Shalagais Mevarchan Alein Bar Pradama. So what we see from this, as Rav Noy and Babaya, that this is teaching us that shlakais, meaning cooked vegetables, make a braya pri ha'adama. Says Rashi, shlakais is kol yerek shalak. That doesn't really help us much. But if you look, there's a Rashi in Pesachim Lamites. Rashi says shlakais is mevushalan harbe me'oid ad shed nimuchan. It is very, very cooked until it becomes dissolving, right? Until it becomes soft, like disintegrating the vegetable. That's what we're talking about. And over there, if you look at Rashi, Rashi makes a difference there between shlukin and bishul. Bishul is turning on the fire and putting in the vegetable. Shalokes is muvusholen harbe ma'oi. Right? There's, as we'll see later on in the Gemara, there's kavushin, which is like pickling, putting something, but it's not no fire. Then there's right soaking something in water. The next level is bishul, where you actually turn on the flame to make the process of the vegetable and the water, or the fruit and the water, become more kinetically connected. Right, the fire is doing that. And then you have shlokes, which is actually cooking it for a while. Right, that's what we're talking about here. So the Gemara opens up by telling us that the shlokos, cooked vegetables, to a significant amount, is nevertheless going to get still a bracha of Adam. Rashi, as we say, pointed out in Psachim, it's Acheni Muchan. It's mamish like dissolving. It's mamish disintegrating. That it will still get the bracha of Adam. Says the Gemara. We're going to skip the parentheses over here. People take it out. The text we just did, based upon this Gemara, but like I said, it applies more generally. This is the Gemara. Darsha Chizda. Rav Chizda made this drasha. I don't really understand these Rashis, as you'll see in a second. Darsh Rav Chizda Kaf. Rav Chizda was darshing this as well. Mishum Rabbeinu, in the name of Rabbeinu. Everybody remember, we've already had Mishum Rabbeinu now a number of times in brachas, but this is very fascinating. Over here, the Gemara says Umanu Rav. Who's Mishum Rabbeinu? It means Rav. Keep that in mind in a minute when we will see that the Gemara says the same exact lashon in the name of Shmuel, which is maybe why the Gemara explains it. In any event, look at Rashi. Rashi says Mishum Rabbeinu Rav, and I've said to you that you have to look whoever Rashi explains in a Masechta and Brachos, or comes on Mishum Rabbeinu many times. Sometimes Rashi says Rav, sometimes he doesn't. But never do we find that the Gemara explains that Mishum Rabbeinu means Rav, and Rashi says that's Rav. That is mind-boggling. Why is Rashi telling me that it means Rav when the Gemara itself says that Rabbeinu is Rav? Okay, we don't know. Says the Gemara, so Darash Rav Chizda Mishum Rabbeinu. Rav Chizda darshan from something that Rav said, that shlokos mevorach aleim bar priadama, that on the cooked vegetables you make adama. Rabbi Seinu hayardim Eretz Yisrael umanu ula, and our rabbis who come from Eretz Yisrael, right? Remember, leaving Eretz Yisrael, you make iridah, going there, so you make aliyah. So the rabbis who are yored from Eretz Yisrael, and who are those rabbis? It's the plural, but we mean one person. Who? Ula. So Mishmei Rabbi Yechanan, Ula says the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Shlokos Mavorch Alim Shakal Niyabed Varai. Now what bracha do you make on the shlokos? On the cooked vegetables, you make a shahaka. And now Rav Chizda says b'shem himself, V'ani Omer, says Rav Chizda, and I say, Kol shetchilase ber priadama shlokos shakal niyabed varai. Whatever initially on the type of vegetable you would make a hadama, so that when you cook it, you make a shahaka. And whatever bracha on a vegetable initially when it's raw would be a shahakal. When you cook it, then you make a hadama. Does that make sense? So again, you have three stages in this Gemara. You have the first opinion, which is Rav Chizda saying Mishum Rabbeinu, meaning Mishum Rav, which is that shlokos get a hadama. Then you have Rav Chizda saying in the name of Ula, the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that shlokos are shahakol. And then Rav Chizda says that shlokos are depends. If the vegetable is the type of vegetable that when it was raw you made a hadama, so then when you cook it a lot you make a shahakol. But if it's the kind of vegetable that when it was raw you made a shahakol, when you cook it a lot then you make a hadama. This is the three stages of this Gemara. The Gemara is going to have a parallel in a second. So now let's just explain before we go further. Bishlama says the Gemara, I understand, says the Gemara, that anything where in the beginning of this life of this vegetable, when it was raw, it was not normal edible, so you made a shahakal. So shloke ber priadama that you make when it's very cooked, now you make a hadam. I understand where I find that mishkachas lo bekarba, the silk of a kara. I find that in the cabbage or in the beets or in the pumpkins, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody here celebrated Halloween. I assume not. But if you ever had a pumpkin, I don't think it's edible. I mean, for a rhinoceros, for an elephant, hippopotamuses, I know they eat raw pumpkins, but I don't know about human beings if they eat raw pumpkins. I don't think so. I think you have to bake it, cook it, something like that. Beets, Again, I'm not sure, but certainly all the beets that I've ever had have always been baked or cooked beforehand. Cabbage is the only one I wasn't sure about. I know obviously chalbs is it's baked, it's cooked, but what about raw cabbage? Anybody ever, is that healthy? Is that like lettuce? I will leave that, huh? Coleslaw, but that's kavash. That's very stoked. I don't know about raw. People eat raw cabbage. Is that a common thing? I'm not sure. Okay, we'll leave that to people who know. But anyway, the Gemara is making the assumption that on those things, right, where in the beginning you make a shahako, that later on when you cook them, when you do something to that to make it more edible, then of course you make adam. So the Gemara says again, Bishlam kosher shahako nemedvar, shloka ber adam mishkach lebekar v'tzluka v'kara. But what about the other way? It says the more el kosher tchilas the ber adama. But anything that starts as the adama shloka shahako lechem mishkach. Where do you find that a vegetable that was a regular hadama that after you cook it now you make a shahako? Where is that seen? So it says the Gemara, Amram Nachman Yitzchak, Mashkach lo b'tomi v'karti. We find that by garlic and by leeks, right? Sheyichasu sainenu, right? Reminds you of Rosh Hashanah, to eat the leeks. And those things, when they're in their natural state, you make a hadama. But after you cook them, so the Gemara says that you would make a shahako. So we find the situation to explain Rav Chisda. At this stage of the Gemara, where are we? That three opinions, right? We have the opinion initially from Rav Noi B'Shmei Abaya that shalokas you make adam, which would be the same opinion as Rav. Then you have the opinion of Rav Ula and the name of Rav Yochanan that it's shahako. And then you have the opinion of Rav Chisda that it depends. Some shlokas will make hadama, some shlokas will make a shahako. What does it depend on? Depends on what it was initially. When it was a raw vegetable, was that the kind of vegetable made a hadama? Then if so, then when it be cooked, you make a shahako. If it's a kind of raw vegetable and you made a shahako, because it wasn't really edible, then when you cook it, then you make a hadama. That's the three stages of opinions that we have in this part of the Gemara. Yeah, so it says Rashi, Vani Omer Liashiv Devrem She'en Chalukin Yesh Man Pri Adam Yesh Man Shahako. Rav Chisda, he says, well, maybe they're not really necessarily arguing. Liashiv Devrem says, She'en Chalukin. Remember yesterday we had Olam Chesam and Aleph when Rav Shmuel, who normally said that any davar that has from the Chavish Minei Dagon, right, that you make a mezainis. So, but when it came to the Shasisa, remember Rav said Shahako and Shmuel said Mermin and mezainis. So Chizda says, they're not arguing, right? It was the difference between Ava and Raka, depending on how thick or thin the mixture was. So over here, what do we have today? So we have Rashi. The Gemara is not saying it per se, but Rashi is telling us that Rav Chizda, Vani Omer, is not just Rav Chizda saying it in his own words, his own opinion. Rashi is telling us, Vani Omer is Liyashiv Divrei. He's coming to be for entering this machlokes that we saw between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. She'en chalukin yesh. They're not arguing. They could have a way that you could potentially understand how they could both agree. From the Gemara, it's not clear, right? That's, I think, Rashi putting that in. I'm not so sure that the Gemara is necessarily so obvious that they're not disagreeing. Says Rashi, Kol Yerek Hanech Al Chai, any vegetable that you would eat normally raw, right? A regular vegetable that you eat raw, a pepper. Right? It's fine raw. You make a adama. When you cook it, you've taken it out of its normative state, and now you've made it something in more negative. And now you make a shahako. Doesn't mean that it's not good, right? If you go to fancy restaurants, now they have what you would call shishito peppers, I think it's called. Right? Some of them can be very spicy. What do they do with the pepper? They take the pepper and they are doing something to it that makes it very soft. Doesn't mean that it's not edible. Doesn't mean that it's not good. It just means it's greyusa in the sense of the vegetable. Since it was edible chai, and that makes its normal appearance as a adama, when you've now totally changed it, the greyusa, now you're making a shahako. So, the Gemara is going to later on point out that it's going to be applicable to garlic and leeks. And any vegetable, it's not normal to eat it raw. Right? Rashi's not saying that it's not edible. Just you hear the Rashi, Lashon Rashi is very medayik in Rashi. V'chol yerek she'ein darkoi le'echol chai. It's not a Rashi says that it can't be eaten. That it's not a derech to be eaten when it's raw. Right? It's the difference between saying that you can't eat it raw or you. It's not the normative way to eat it raw. And if you nevertheless ate it raw, you would make it shahakal. So and now you bring it to its normal way of eating. Who ikar pirya? That is the ikar piri. The ikar piri of this life of this vegetable is to be cooked. Then you'll make a normal bar bradam on this. Okay, we have to do this types here, or at least the first half of it for now, and then we'll get to the rest. We see this by garlic and leeks. By garlic and leeks, the Gemara explained that's when you make a shahakal. That's the example. Was when it was raw, you make a adama, and therefore when it's cooked, now you make a shahakal. I love this. Right, our eyes are lying eyes. That's a saying, right? Our eyes don't lie, says Taisus. We see with our eyes that when you use garlic and leeks in cooking, it's delicious. It makes it better. So how can you say that you're making a shahakal on it? You see that it's making the food a lot more tasty. That's Taisus kasha. What's Taisus the answer? Yishlam the hainu bishvril habosaf amel shebetoicha. Taisus don't say the garlic and the leeks are better when they're cooked. They make the food that they're being cooked with better, but not that they're inherently better. For them, it could still be ligreusa, inherently in the garlic, inherently in the leek itself. But it's true, as part of the mixture that it's being mixed with, it's becoming better. Therefore, Taisus understands that the garlic and the leek, where Chizda is explaining, when it's chai would be adama, and when it's cooked, it's going to be a shahakal, even though the mixture that it's getting is not like greyusa, it's lotevusa. It's making the mixture that much more tasty. Taisus likes it. Taisus says this makes sense. Anything that you're going to eat that is going to be as delicious when it's cooked as it is when it was raw, or vice versa, right? If you eat it when it would be raw, like it would be cooked, if they taste the same in the sense that they're both delicious, like, for example, various different types of legumes and apples. Then the bracha b'shayna should be the same whether they are raw or whether they are cooked. Okay, so I don't know anybody here is old enough, but I'm old enough, and I very much enjoy in the winter, especially when my grandmother comes, to have a baked apple for dessert. That's how I grew up. That was dessert. I have stories to say, but no time. So, what does it mean, a baked apple? Take an apple, you put it in an oven, and you let it sit there. What bracha do you make on a baked apple? People use it for dessert. Again, not new age, modern, young generation, but old generation, that was the dessert Friday night in the winter, absolutely every week. So what bracha do you make on it? If you were just eating it alone, forget the dessert question, I'm not talking about that. You just had a baked apple alone, what bracha do you make? Says Taisus, should make her eight. In other words, what Taisus is pointing out over here is not that Rav Chizda, he's not arguing Rav Chizda. Taisus is saying, Rav Chizda is making a point, like Rashi said, he's coming to miyashiv the words of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Taisus is coming at point at another additional point. Rav Chizda is not saying that you make a hadama or shahakal by definition. That if it was chai, then it's and you ate it, that's a hadama. Then by definition, when it's shlaka, you're only going to make a shahakal, or vice versa. If by chai you couldn't eat it, so you made a shahakal. Then when it's cooked, you absolutely make a hadama. That's not the only permutations. There is another permutation. And what's that permutation? When it was chai and when it's sholek, it's the same tasty. It's the same good. In that situation, says Taisus, Rav Chizda would agree that you make the same bracha, whether it's chai or whether it's sholek. It makes the same bracha. And Taisus gives the example of a tapuach. Obviously, we can see from this Taisus they had baked apples in the early days of the Taisivists. Okay, continues Taisus. Yeah. You make the same bracha. This is a very controversial line here in this Taisvis. I don't mean it's controversial in Allah. I mean it's controversial to winos. No, those are people who are drunks. I don't mean in that sense. I mean people who are, whatever the fancy word is for people who are, aficionados. Yeah, but there's another word for people who are experts in the wine tasting. Connoisseur, yeah, no, there's a specific word for wine. Huh? Sommelier. Sommelier, yeah, no, there's another word. But okay, whatever the word is. It's like a sholok and chai. They're all good words, fine, but that's not the word I wanted. Anyhow, mitam zem v'rachin and nam al yaim mevushal ber gefen shekol kach utoiv achar abishul k'may kaidem lachen. It says Taisus, pasteurized wine, right? Wine that's mevushal is just as good as wine that isn't, and therefore you both get a hot gefen. Now, you ask any wine expert, they're going to tell you, ugh, the mevushal wine is terrible. Okay, nowadays the wine people, I'm a Herzog, but I'm not, and I'm related, but I'm not part of the family connection. I don't get free wine. But what I will say is this: they do tell you that the pasteurization today is done in a lightning second. It's mamish a very fast process where it's not destroying the wine; it's rather bringing out some flavors, taking away some bacteria, whatever. And so today they want to make the taina that it's really not a problem. But if you asked 50 years ago, somebody who was an expert in wine about the yain bushel, be like, oh, it's disgusting. Like you can't compare the yain bushel to the yain it's not bushel. You can't compare. But Tosis is saying to us over here, there's no difference. Yain bushel is just as good. It's just as good after bishul as it was before, and therefore what you get to high geffen no matter what, either way. And then Taisus continues. Interestingly, he's changed around the order of the Gemara. Silka remains in the middle, but here he puts Kara first. The Kara of a silk of a krov, and these kind of things like pumpkin and the beets, right, and the cabbage, and these things which are really better only when they're cooked. And they're much better cooked than they are raw. So then, when they're raw, you make a shahakal, and when they get cooked, then you make adama, because that's really the nice way to eat it. You don't really eat in a normative way a pumpkin when it's raw. Right, this one, armonius, is a chestnut. Again, I don't know if you've ever had chestnuts, but I do remember having chestnuts as a kid, and they always had to be baked. Right, you could not eat a chestnut plain. And kavushim, I've had this experience again as a kid many times. For Rosh Hashanah, to have shechiyanu. So my mother would get a quince, and we would eat the quince. That's what a kavushim is. The quince. It looks like an apple or a pear, and I think that they say it's for someone related. But have you ever had it? We had no idea. Obviously, they cook it, but they would sell it in the store, and it would cut it like an apple and say, "This is shakiano," okay? And it was disgusting. And like every year, the same disgusting. But that's because we had no idea what to do with it. A quince actually has to be cooked. It looks like an apple or a pear, but it actually has to be cooked to be edible. The taste is the same. It's not normal to eat it. If I had no taste on Brachot Lamed Ches when I was 8 years old, I would have been able to tell my parents. This is not what you do with a quince. But we didn't know. So Taisus is not. It's simply not right to eat when it's raw. So it's just not the appropriate way to eat. It doesn't taste good. So obviously you're going to make a shahakal on it. Then you're not going to make the ha'etz because it's not good. Then it will come in to make a ha'etz. This is exactly what Rav Chizda is saying, right? So Taisus is agreeing exactly with Rav Chizda. And he's adding in one additional point to Rav Chizda, that is, if it's just as delicious when it's chai as when it's mevushal, then it gets the same bracha in both. Okay? Lomi bards. I have no idea what that is, but there's some type of a chestnut that I guess that grows there in France or wherever, which is I guess able to be eaten raw. So then mevarchan lebar per eitz afilu betchila. Then you can make even an eitz on it in the beginning because I guess it's edible. The whole davar miskakav v'shula kigayin time of the and things that get ruined in the bishul, like the leeks and the garlic, like we just said. Not that they get ruined and they make the food that they're being cooked with bad. No, of course not. They make the food being cooked with great. But in it itself, in other words, the garlic, the leek itself, in and of itself, it's becoming legreusa. So then things that are sort of like that when they get cooked, they're being turned to the negative. When they are in an initial state, you'll make a hadama on it, when they get cooked, you will make a shahakal. That is the position of Taisvis. We'll do the rest of Tosfos in a few minutes, but I have to now continue the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Oh my gosh, we have a lot to do and no time. Says the Gemara. We are now Darash of Nachman, about almost halfway down the narrow line. Halfway down the narrow line. Darash of Nachman, Mishum Rabbeinu. So now we have another version of the Gemara, a different version for this time from Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, in the name of Rabbeinu, Umanu, who's the Rabbeinu? Shmuel. The Gemara tells us Shmuel. Look at Rashi, Darash of Nachman, Kach, the exact same Rashi as we had before. Mishum Rabbeinu, Shmuel. Again, like I told you, I don't really understand this Rashi. What is Rashi adding? I'm not sure. In any event, so Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel that what? Shlokas Shlokas you make on it Adama. That would mean that Rav and Shmuel are what? Agreeing with each other, right? Because that's exactly the same thing that Rav Chizda said. That Rav says that Shlokas to get Adama. The Chavireinu Ayardim Eretz Yisrael Umanu Ula Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shlokas V'Vorch Malim Shahak Al Nebedvari. And Nachman continues and says that the rabbis, the Ula says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Shlokas you make a shahakal. That's exactly the same as what we said before. What's the difference? One difference in this line. The one difference in this line is that it says v'chavereinu, right? Instead of saying v'rabbi seinu, what does Rashi say? V'chavereinu Rav Nachman chashiv. Rav Nachman's very important. Well, like Karl Ula Rabbi seinu, he doesn't call Ula his Rebbe. Okay, a number of things to say about this. We're going to have a Gemara later on in Brachot about Nachman and Ula, so you remember this Gemara later on. When we get there, we'll point this out. It'll be very funny. That's number one. Number two, it reminds us of the Gemara Sanhedrin Kuf Beis, right? Because over there the Gemara says that Rav Ashi wanted to give a shir about Menashe. He was talking about the Yetzer Hara of the Avodah Zarah. So he says, the Gemara says that he opened up the shir. Okay, tomorrow we're going to talk about our buddies. Menashe, and Menashe comes to Medjim that night and shows him that he knows nothing in Hilchos Brachos and unbelievable. So Rashi saw in person. Next, he says, "Okay, we're going to dash in today from Rabbi Seinu. We're going to talk about Menashe." So here you see in this Gemara a difference between Rabbi Seinu and Chavirenu, right? A little bit of slight. It's really not the time right now, but I will just say that the same thing applies. And there was once an article in a Jewish magazine after Rabbi Soloveitchik passed away. They wrote a biography, Rabbi Soloveitchik Zal. They wouldn't give him the T, for Zatzal. Okay, these things are not new. Or sometimes people will quote rabbis and they won't actually quote them by name. These are stuff of legends. They're like thousands of years of little perceived ways to refer to people in terms of the respect that one had for the other one. So anyway, Rav Nachman is telling us in the name of Shmuel that Shlokas get Hadama, and that Rav Yochanan says that Shlokas get a Shahakal. So far, we just have a change of Rav and Shmuel, but fundamentally, everybody's agreeing in the same opinion. And then Rav Nachman continues. Rav Nachman says about himself, I say that this is actually a machlokes. This machlokes between Rav and Shmuel on the one side that says Shlokas get Adama, and Rabbi Yochanan that says the Shlokas are a Shahakal. You know where this comes from? It's really a machlokes in the Tanoim. The Tanya Yitzim Baraki Kasher and Moshe Shalini Murk Devar Meir. That according to Rabbi Meir, the Gemara Pesachim Mem Aleph tells us that if a person wants to eat matzah, right, the longest Pesach, right, I have no teeth. How should I be able to the matzah, right? So what do you do with this kind of matzah? So somebody took the matzah and they put it into water. Don't ask me at the 18 minutes. I'm not getting into this right now. Gebrux, not Gebrux, just forget all that. Let's just try to finish the Gemara without taking up too much more time. So the Tanya Yitzim Barake Kashari, if you took the matzah and you put it into water, you'll be able to be Yitzim according to Rameir. And if you cook the matzah, so long as it's not nimuach, so long as it's not totally, it's not being dissolved, so then you'll be able to be Yitzim the mitzvah of matzah according to Rameir. Rabbi Yossi Amar Yitzim Barake Kasharui. Yossi agrees with Meir that when you take the matzah and put it into water, that you could be yaitz in the mitzvah of matzah. However, but not if you cook it. Even though it's not disintegrated, even though it's not dissolved, you will not be able to be yaitz in the mitzvah. So according to the way Rav Nachman is trying to say it, Rav Nachman is trying to say that Rav and Shmuel's opinion is like Rabbi Meir. That is to say that you make a hadama even after it's cooked, because the same way that even after it's cooked, you can be yaitze in matzah, it's still the same thing. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you say shahakol after it's cooked because it loses its status, So too Rav Nachman is saying that this is the opinion of Rabbi Yosi, that once a matzah is cooked, you cannot be yotze the mitzvah of matzah in it. Let's see Rashi. Rashi tells us that Amar Shlakish HaHakavani Amar Shem Chalukim Apuk Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yosi V'Divrei Shmuel Divrei Rabbi Yochanan V'Chol Minei Rakos. Pain. The Chalukim tells that the machlokes between Shmuel and like I say and Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is in all vegetables. Shmuel Rabbi Meir. The Amar Vushal Kreva Milsa. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Meir, right? That it still remains in its extant state, so therefore it still gets the same bracha. Rabbi Yochanan Kag Rabbi Yosi. Right, Yates and Bracha Kashori, but my Yidei Achilas Matzah. If you put matzah in water, you're going to be Yotzi mitzvah matzah. Why? It still will be considered lechem oini. I love to talk more about it. Unfortunately, no time. But you can't cook it. Why? The sulav lechem ikri, because once you cook it, it will not be called lechem anymore. Forget lechem only. It's not even lechem once you cook it. So therefore, their opinion would be that the same would be true with regards to the fruit, the vegetables, and that's why you would make a shahako. Good. So that's where we are now, right now in the Gemara. At this stage, we think that Shmuel and like I say, and Rab would hold like Reb Meir, and that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yosi. Says the Gemara, it's not correct. Reb Nachman is not correct. Velohi, this is the Stama de Talmuda explaining now and jumping in and saying that Reb Nachman is not correct. Why not? Because the machlekes about matzah has nothing to do with brachas. The machlekes of matzah is a machlekes with regards to matzah. It's not a machlekes that has anything to do with the hilchos of brachas. He says everybody agrees that shlokas what get a bar pradama va'ad kan like Rabbi Yosi hasam el mishon nevin and tam matzah v'leka. What's the reason over there that Rabbi Yosi holds that you're not being able to be yaitz? It's not because the fire came along and cooked the thing and made it no longer able to make the bracha. It has nothing to do with bracha. It has to do with matzah. You need the tam matzah. And when you cook matzah, it doesn't have the time of matzah anymore. Says the Rashi, the sulav lachamekri. I feel Rabbi Yosi might have the bracha milsakai. Even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that the matzah would remain the same in terms of his bracha. That's not the issue here. The issue is whether or not you can be yotzi mitzvah, matzah's mitzvah. You have your normal lechem to be yotzi. Are you going to still make the bracha, or basically agree? Again, says the Gemara. Everybody agrees that shlokas you make on a bar pradam. The reason Rabbi Yosi said that I'm a vushal matzah, you're not able to be yaitz matzah, is not because of a problem with the change in bracha. It has nothing to do with the hilchos of brachas. It has to do with that a matzah requires tam matzah, and here you don't have the tam matzah. I feel Rabbi Yosi maida. Rabbi Yosi maida with regards to the vegetables. If you cook them, that you would still make the same bracha. That doesn't change. What is interesting is that Rashi is telling us, Rashi says the sulav lechem ikri. It's not called lechem. That seems to be going a little too far. Rabbi Yosi is not requiring that to be lechem. Rabbi Yosi could be saying it is lechem. It could be you still make hamaitzi, but tamatzi you don't have. So I don't understand Rashi 100%. Why does Rashi have to go that far to say that the reason that Rabbi Yosi is saying that it's not tam matzah is because it's not lechem? Maybe it's not lechem. It could be lechem. He agrees that by vegetables you can still make the same bracha. He could agree with not like the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. He could agree with the opinion of Shmuel and Rav that you still make a hadama. So why can't you just say that same? I'm not 100% sure I understand this Rashi. Why Rashi feels the need to say that it's not called lechem. Say it's not called lechem only. Say it's not called tam matzah. Say something else. But to say it's not called lechem, when he literally says that with regards to vegetables, it's still called the same vegetable, you still make adama, I don't really understand. Okay. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. It's a very unbelievable Gemara. Rav Chia bar Abba says the name Rabbi Yochanan, Shlokes mevarchen alein bar pradama. Shlokes make adama. Okay, so that sounds like what? That according to Rabbi Yochanan, Shlokes make adama, that sounds like what? Nothing like we said before. Both Rav Chizda, who said the name of Ula, and Rav Nachman, who said the name of Ula, they both said that Rabbi Yochanan says that shlokas you make shahako. So what's Rabbi Chia bar Abba saying? So the Gemara is now saying a new opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan shlokas mevarchen alein bar pradama. It's a different opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yom Bar Yefes and Rabbi Yochanan shlokas mevarchen alein shakal and v'dvar. Rabbi Yom Ben Yefes says that he makes according to Rabbi Yochanan you make a shahako. Says Says the Gemara now, unbelievable line. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak. Now remember, we already had Rav Nachman Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Yitzchak was coming to answer Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda tried to say that it depends on the kind of the origin of the vegetable. If the type of vegetable you made a shahakal on it because it wasn't edible when it was raw, then you make a hadam when it's cooked. And if it's a type of vegetable that it's totally edible raw, it's delicious raw, you make a hadam, and when it's cooked, you make a shahakal. So the Gemara wants to know, what was that situation? Where did you ever find the situation? I want to know, where do you see something that's a raw vegetable, you make a adama, then later on you make a shahagol? The Gemara says betun v'karte. That was Rav Nachman Yitzchak. And now we have Rav Nachman Yitzchak coming back in. Rav Nachman Yitzchak kava ula l'shabeshda ki Rav Yam Bar Yefes. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says that Ula was kavea, the mistake of Rav Yam Bar Yefes. Okay? Listen to that line. Rav Nachman Yitzchak is saying that Ula was kaveh, the mistake of Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes, into the halacha. What does he mean? Says Rashi, Ula she'amar mishum Rabbi Yochanan la'el. Ula, who said the name of Rabbi Yochanan earlier, that the halacha about shlokas is you make a shahakol. Lomad v'kava shibushe ki Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes. He learned and he was kaveh, the mistake, like Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes. Ad sheniskoa beliba, until the mamash went into his heart. V'achsham b'veis hamesh b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Meaning, Rabbi Yochanan never says a mistake. He says that Rabbi Yochanan holds that it's shahakol. Ula heard it, and he said not just the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's shahakol, but it's a mistake. So why does Rav Nachman Yitzchak coming to explain Rav Chisda, and now he's saying it's a mistake? I'm not 100% sure, but in any event, what our opinion is over here is very clear that according to the Gemara, Rav Nachman Yitzchak is saying that Rabbi Yochanan Yefes is a mistake, and Ula heard it from Yom Yefes, and he was kaveh this as a halacha, like Rabbi Yochanan, even though it's all based upon a incorrect Messiah of Rabbi Yom Yefes. Says the more Toiber Abzeira was mind-boggled. Can you compare Rabbi Yom Yefes to Rabbi Bar Abba? Rabbi Bar Abba Daik v'gam Shmaitzim Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. Rabbi Bar Abba, he was medayik his Shmaitzim from his Rabbi Yochanan, his Rebbe. Right, Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. We just had this. Remember Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi? We just had the same Gemara in the beginning of the beginning of the fifth parak. Right, we had the Gemara told us on Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph that Rabbi Rabbi that he stopped having any laughter when he heard Rabbi Yochanan saying that he's not supposed to be laughing too much after. So here we have another situation. So that Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes is not able to be comparable to Rabbi Zera. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yam is not able to be comparable to Rabbi Bar Abba. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Zera wondered, how could it possibly be that you're going to be comparing Rabbi Bar Abba in the same sentence as Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes? Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes says Rabbi Bar Abba. Rabbi Bar Abba Rabbi Bar was medayik and learned very well from his Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes loy dayik. Rabbi Yam Bar Yefes was not medayik so well in the Shmaitzvot. Rabbi Bar Abba called us. Yam had the Talmud coming to Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi, and every 30 days Rabbi Bar Abba go over his learning by Rabbi Yochanan and his Rabbi. Taisa says no, it doesn't mean kol Talmud. You can't go over all your learning in 30 days. But rather, on the 31st day, he would go over. The Ritva says he would go over generally, but not literally every single thing that he learned, but the general principles. Rabbi Yom Yefes didn't go over his learning so well. Even without these two rights of saying how great Reb Bar Abba is next to Reb Yom Bar Yefes, aside from this, there is this kind of a termus. A termus is like a lupin bean, which is even today something that is used then, but today it's used more for health reasons. But Rashi tells us that this kind of a lupin bean, you have to, like the Gemara says, it's disgusting. You literally can't eat it. You have to like soak it 7 times, and then it becomes so delicious that you eat it as dessert. So also v'shol Rabbi Yochanan. They asked Rabbi Yochanan, what bracha do you make on it? He says you make a adam on it. This is a good raya that you see that Rabbi Yochanan holds that on shlokas you don't make a shahaka, on shlokas you make a adama. Is this a good raya? This is a terrible raya. Why is it a terrible raya? Because you can't eat it. It's not edible beforehand. You have to be soaking it 7 times. So what's the raya? So I don't understand why the more thinks it's such a strong raya like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan here is dealing with a situation that you're saying adama and something that was totally inedible, maybe on something like that, Rabbi Yochanan would agree. If it's absolutely inedible, if it's mamish not able to be eaten, Rashi tells us there in Be'er, Rashi says v'hu mar ma'od. It is really really bitter. Then it becomes sweet, and you could use it for dessert. So maybe in that kind of situation, like Rav Chizda says, maybe Rabbi Yochanan would agree. Maybe there wouldn't be a problem over there. In any event, the Gemara wants to use that as a raya. Continues the Gemara. I saw Rabbi Yochanan ate a olive that was salted, a salted olive. Right? We know melich kiraseach. Right? Rashi says kamiyamim. Taish doesn't say that, but Rashi says that you put the zayas, you put the olive in the brine, in the salt for a bunch of days, and then Rabbi Yochanan would eat these salted olives, and he would make on it a bracha in the beginning and the end. So the more wants to know what the more wants to say this is another right. If you want to say that the shalakais, this kind of a cooked vegetable, stays in its initial way, and so then when he made a bracha on it, ha'etz. Well, then after he made a eitz. But if you're going to say the shlokas are not considered to be their initial state, so then then in the beginning, what did he make on it? He made maybe shahako, fine. But what are you going to say? That he made a bracha at the end? Meaning that according to the way Rabbi Yochanan is learning, that we're trying to say now that Rabbi Chibar Abba is correct, that he makes a bar per adam or bar per eitz when whatever the vegetable is, even after it's cooked. So here on this Zayas Maliach, he made a bracha beforehand. What was the bracha that he made? If you tell me that he made a bracha before and a bracha after, the bracha after is only obviously a bracha main shalish, and he would have only made that bracha if he made ha'etz. So you see that if he made ha'etz, then even after it was cooked, you still are making ha'etz. So the Gemara says, and therefore what? Your proof is that you think that Rabbi Yochanan therefore says that shlokas are still getting a hadam or ha'etz, and not a shahaka. What's the proof? Dilma, the bracha maybe the bracha afterwards that he made is a burn of fashes. Who said it's a raya over here that Rabbi Yochanan holds that shlokas are in fact a bar per adam? Could be that it's still a shahaka. All right, we didn't have time to finish the rest of the taste. We'll have to come back to that tomorrow.